I had never intended to cross the Black Forest myself. My destination was Freiburg, and I was running late. My GPS, which I had been using for years, promised a shorter route through the dense forests off the highway. 30 minutes faster, the screen showed with a hint of skepticism, but also relief at the prospect of saving time. I turned off the main road. The transition was abrupt. The modern, wide federal highway gave way to a narrow, winding road that disappeared between the trees. The light immediately dimmed. The tall spruces and firs formed an almost impenetrable canopy above me. The air felt heavy, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. It was quiet, too quiet. Kilometer after kilometer, the world around me seemed to shrink. The road markings faded, and the GPS occasionally started to stutter, as if even the satellites had lost track here. The rain, which had previously been a fine drizzle, intensified. The wipers squeaked monotonously across the glass. At some point I noticed something strange, markings on the trees along the road. It started with a red dot, then a second one further ahead. Further on I saw a cross roughly smeared onto the bark with fresh, shiny paint. I pushed aside the unsettling thoughts. Perhaps they were forestry markings, routine work by forest workers. After another 5 kilometers, I discovered the car. It was a black station wagon, perhaps an older Audi model, standing at an angle on the roadside. The driver's side door was wide open, and a slight scratch ran along the side of the car. The vehicle was abandoned, with no hazard lights or other signs of life. The rain rattled on the empty body, and the sound had something eerie about it. I stopped and reached for my phone. No signal, of course not. In a fit of duty, but also growing uneasiness, I got out. The muddy ground gave way under my shoes, and the rain seeped through my jacket. I glanced inside the car. The seats were empty, but on the passenger seat lay a handbag half open, its contents spilled across the seat: wallet, lipstick, papers. None of it looked disturbed, but on the back seat lay something that made me shiver: a child's shoe, alone and dirty. I felt my pulse quicken. "Hello, is anyone here?" My voice sounded hollow, swallowed by the forest. No answer. As I looked around, I noticed tracks in the mud, footprints, deep and clear, leading away from the car into the forest. Instinctively, I wanted to get back into my car and call the police, but my phone remained silent. The screen only showed the no network symbol. I stood between duty and fear, but something about the tracks made me hesitate. A sound broke the silence. It was a crackle, followed by a rustling, as if someone was trudging heavily through the undergrowth. I whirled around, but all I saw were the dark, menacing-looking trees. My heart pounded. It was time to go. I hurried back to my car, my eyes constantly glancing over my shoulder. But before I reached the door, my gaze fell on something that hadn't been there before: a small white card tucked under my windshield wiper. Trembling, I pulled it out. On it were just 3 words, handwritten with a red felt-tip pen: "We see you." The words burned into my brain. I felt frozen, my hand clutching the card. Then I heard them, footsteps, several, approaching quickly. I ripped open the driver's door and jumped inside. As I started the engine, the car's lights illuminated the road ahead, and for a brief moment I saw them: shadows, 4, maybe 5 figures moving out of the forest onto the road. Adrenaline took over. I pressed the gas pedal and sped off, my head swirling with questions. Who were they? What did they want? And why did I feel like I had driven straight into their trap? The engine roared as I sped down the narrow road. The shadows behind me were swallowed by the darkness, but my heart continued to pound as if they were still chasing me. The rain had turned into a thunderstorm. Lightning illuminated the sky, and thunder rolled like an invisible threat over the trees. The GPS failed completely. The screen flickered and showed only a static image. I clung to the steering wheel, forcing myself to stay calm. But then, without warning, a barrier of branches and tree trunks appeared on the road. I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded and the tires slid on the wet asphalt. The car came to a halt just short of the barrier. I looked around frantically. No way out. The trees stood close together, leaving no possibility to drive around the barrier. I was about to reverse when I heard footsteps, fast, heavy footsteps approaching the vehicle. My breath hitched, and I reached for my phone, but the screen remained blank. No signal, no lifeline. A voice broke the darkness: "Get out." It was deep and calm, the kind of voice that tolerates no argument. I could only dimly make out the figure, a tall man masked with a rifle in his hand. Behind him more figures appeared, all armed, their silhouettes blurring in the rain. "I have nothing," I shouted, holding my hands visibly high. "I'm just a journalist, we know." The man replied coldly, "Get out." I hesitated, but then they struck the windshield with a heavy object and it shattered into a spiderweb of cracks. I had no choice. I slowly opened the door and raised my hands as two of the men roughly pulled me from the car. The rain lashed down on us and I felt the mud give way under my feet. They searched my car. One of them, a slender man with a restless look, pulled my laptop from the bag on the passenger seat and held it up triumphantly. "Here it is," he said. "This is what we're looking for." "What?" I stammered. "That's just my laptop. There's nothing on it that would interest you." The leader, the masked man, stepped towards me. "Listen," he said quietly, almost friendly. "You've stumbled into something you can't understand, but believe me, you won't survive if you lie to us." Before I could answer, they pulled a hood over my head. Everything went black. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I came to, I was in some kind of basement. The room was damp and the smell of mold hung in the air. My hands were tied behind my back and my legs felt numb. In the distance, I could hear faint voices, but they were muffled. I began to survey my surroundings. Through a tear in the hood, I saw concrete walls, old metal pipes, and a single faint light hanging from the ceiling, swinging like a pendulum. Next to me were old tools, a rusty axe, a hammer, pliers. My stomach tightened at the thought of what they might do with these objects. The voices came closer. Two men entered the room. They spoke about me as if I wasn't there. "We have to get rid of him," said one, whose voice I recognized as the slender man's. "He could reveal everything." "Not yet," the leader countered. "We need to find out if he's alone." Their words left me little time to think. With trembling fingers, I began to loosen the restraints on my hands. It was difficult, but the dampness of the rope helped me to loosen it piece by piece. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash. Something had fallen nearby, and the men rushed out of the room, apparently alerted. I used the moment to free myself completely. My heart raced, and my thoughts were a mess, but I knew I had to act. I found a small rusty rod in a corner. It wasn't much, but better than nothing, with the makeshift tool. I tackled the door. It was old and wooden, and with enough force I managed to break the lock. The hallway beyond was dark, only sparsely lit by a series of faint light bulbs. The smell of oil and rust was overwhelming. I heard the men shouting somewhere in the distance, but I couldn't understand the words. My instinct told me I had to go up out of this nightmare. On a staircase, I encountered one of the men. He saw me at the last moment, but I reacted faster. With all my strength, I struck him on the shoulder with the rod. He stumbled, and I ran on without looking back. Finally, I reached a heavy metal door. It was only ajar. Beyond it lay the cold, rainy night. I stormed out, my lungs burning and my head spinning with exhaustion, but I had made it. I was outside. The night swallowed me, and the forest was my only protection. I ran, stumbled, fell, but I didn't stop. Behind me, I heard them shouting. The men looking for me, but the forest was dense, and the darkness was my ally. Eventually, when my legs could barely carry me, I saw the lights of a road. It was an old country road, and on the horizon, a truck approached. With my last ounce of strength, I stepped onto the road and waved. The driver stopped, his eyes wide with fright when he saw my condition. "Help me," I gasped, "please." I don't know how much I could explain to him before I lost consciousness. But when I woke up, I was safe. Although I survived, I knew that the men were still out there, and that the truth I had discovered would never fully come to light. It was a warm summer evening when I was driving on the B3. The road led through the hilly landscape of the southern Black Forest, past small villages, half-timbered houses, and fields glowing in the soft light of the setting sun. My car, a dark green VW Golf that I had owned for years, had never let me down before, but the fuel gauge was almost empty. My way to Freiburg, where I would spend another semester at the Albert Ludwigs University. It was my last summer before graduation, and I had decided to drive the route from Munich to Freiburg alone to clear my head. But now, with the fuel gauge just above the red mark, I was forced to look for a gas station. After a few kilometers, I spotted an old, faded sign announcing a gas station. Tankstelle 2 km, it read in peeling paint. With no better option, I turned off the main road and followed a narrow side road lined with tall trees. The light faded and darkness crept over the horizon. The gas station suddenly appeared before me. It was old and run down, with a rusty canopy stretching over two pumps. The windows of the small building next to it were dusty and partly broken. There was no other vehicle in sight, and the silence was almost palpable. I parked my car next to one of the pumps and got out. The ground was cracked and weeds grew in the crevices. A slightly musty smell hung in the air, as if no one had been here for a long time. I knocked on the entrance door of the building, but no one answered. The door was not locked, so I stepped inside. The interior was small and sparsely furnished. An old counter stood at the end of the room, behind it shelves with dusty goods that must have been long expired. An old cash register was the only thing that worked. It hummed softly as if it had forgotten that the world around it had stood still. I was about to go back to my car when I noticed something strange. A fresh trail of dark, sticky dirt stretched across the floor, leading to a door at the back of the room. The door was slightly open and a faint light shimmered behind it. My heart began to beat faster. I knew I should leave, but curiosity was stronger. Carefully, I pushed the door further open. Beyond it was a small workshop where a dark blue Mercedes stood. The car doors were open, and on the seats lay several large bags that had been hastily thrown in. One of the bags was half open, and I could see bundles of banknotes inside. I took a step back, my breath shallow. My gaze fell to the floor, where I saw dark stains and a fresh trail of something liquid leading from the car. Blood, panic rose in me. What should I do? I had no phone reception, and the nearest major town was at least 20 km away. Part of me wanted to jump into the car and drive away immediately, but another part told me it was too late. Before I could decide, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel outside. I froze. Through the dusty window, I could see the lights of a car slowly approaching the gas station. It was a black SUV, and its headlights illuminated the pumps like spotlights on a stage. My pulse raced as I searched for a hiding place. The workshop had no windows, and the only door led back into the sales room. I ducked behind the Mercedes and held my breath as I heard the SUV's car doors slam shut. Voices drifted in, loud and aggressive, but I couldn't understand the words. Then I heard footsteps approaching the building. The door to the sales room was pushed open and the voices grew louder. I heard them talking in a rough, determined tone. One of them seemed to be giving an order, and I heard several pairs of boots stomping through the room. My hiding place was far from safe. The Mercedes offered little protection, and I knew they would find me if they came into the workshop. The only option was to stay quiet and hope they wouldn't search the room. Then I heard the workshop door slowly open. A shadow fell across the floor, and I could make out the silhouette of a man shining a flashlight into the room. My heart was pounding so loudly that I feared he could hear it. The lamp swept across the room and paused for a moment on the bags in the car. The man took a step closer, and I tensed every muscle in my body, ready to run if necessary. "Hey, something's here," the man suddenly shouted, and I knew it was over. The man's shout echoed in the workshop, and my heart stopped for a moment. I pressed myself as close as possible behind the Mercedes, my hands pressed firmly against the cold concrete floor. Footsteps came closer, too. Maybe 3 men entered the room. The flashlight lit up again, and I could see the shadows dancing on the walls. "Look at this," one of them said, his voice rough. "That's a lot of money, but where is he?" "It doesn't matter," another replied impatiently. "Pack the bags and let's go." I heard them pulling the car doors and the bags out of the Mercedes. The rustling of fabric and the dull clinking of bundles of banknotes made my thoughts race. Maybe they would just take the money and disappear. Maybe I would get out of here alive, but then something happened that knocked the ground out from under my feet. "Wait," a third voice said, deeper and calmer than the others. "Something's not right here. The car wasn't alone. Look at the tracks outside." My stomach tightened. I had left the Golf parked in front of the gas station. They knew I was here. "Split up," the deep voice commanded. "Search the area." The flashlight swung through the room again, this time closer to my hiding place. I pressed myself flat against the floor, every fiber of my body tense. The lamp paused for a moment on the Mercedes before moving on. Footsteps moved away and the voices grew fainter. I knew I had to act now. They would come back, and if they found me, it would be over. My gaze fell on a tool rack on the wall. A rusty wrench lay within reach. I grabbed it, my hands trembling, and held it tightly. Slowly, I moved towards the back door of the workshop. It was partly open, and through the crack I could see the dense darkness of the forest. The rain had started again, a soft, steady drumming that broke the silence. I carefully pushed the door open, trying not to make a sound, and slipped out. The cold night air hit me. I was in the backyard of the gas station, surrounded by tall trees whose shadows moved in the faint light of the workshop windows. I paused, listening. But all I heard was the rain and my own breathing. I crept along the back of the building, away from the voices, but then I heard them again, closer than before. "He's in here somewhere," the deep voice said, louder this time. "Unleash the dogs." My heart sank. Dogs, I heard barking, first one then several, cutting through the rain like a knife. I knew I had no time. The forest was my only chance. Without thinking, I ran. The darkness swallowed me. The ground was muddy, and the branches of the trees whipped my face as I stumbled through the forest. The rain made everything slippery, and I had to be careful not to fall. Behind me, I heard the dogs getting closer, their deep, threatening barks making me sweat. I ducked behind a dense bush and held my breath. The dogs were so close now that I could hear their panting. I gripped the wrench tighter in my hand. It wasn't much protection, but it was all I had. Suddenly, one of the dogs burst through the bushes, a large German shepherd with sharp teeth and a shiny black snout. It growled and bared its teeth, its gaze fixed on me. "Get lost," I yelled, more in panic than courage, and swung the wrench blindly. The hit was hard enough to distract it, and it yelped before backing away. But I knew I didn't have much time before the others reached me. I jumped up and ran on, my body screaming with exhaustion. The forest seemed endless, every tree like a menacing silhouette. The rain mixed with the sweat on my skin, and my steps became heavier. Then I saw it, a light, faint and flickering, but it was there, a glimmer of hope. I stumbled towards the clearing that suddenly appeared before me. It was an old hunting cabin, small and made of weathered wood, but it was shelter. I rushed inside and closed the door behind me, locking it with a heavy bolt. My breath came in gasps, and my heart pounded so loudly that it filled my head. The cabin was sparsely furnished, a table, a chair, a fireplace with cold ashes. A hunting rifle hung on the wall, and I reached for it, my trembling hands finding purchase on the smooth wood. The voices outside grew louder. They had reached the cabin. One of the men pounded on the door. "Come out," he yelled. "We know you're here." I raised the rifle, my fingers tight on the trigger. The door groaned under their blows, and I knew it would soon give way. My gaze fell on a small window at the back of the cabin. It was narrow, but it was a way out. With my last ounce of strength, I threw the rifle through the window and pulled myself through. The shards cut into my skin, but I ignored the pain. I ran until the voices behind me disappeared, until the forest completely swallowed me. It was morning when I reached a country road. An old man on a tractor stopped when he saw my condition. He took me to the next village, where I could finally call for help. The police found the gas station, the Mercedes, and the men's tracks, but they had already vanished. The money remained missing. No one could explain why they were there. I only knew one thing: I had survived, but the nightmare would haunt me forever. I've been a truck driver for over 10 years, and Germany's Autobahns are like a second home to me. The A31, known as the Ghost Autobahn, was always one of my favorite routes. Little traffic, endless expanses, and the quiet. Those were the things I liked about this route. But that evening, under the leaden sky and with a strange feeling in my stomach, the familiarity of the road felt unsettlingly alien. I was transporting a load of household appliances from Hamburg to Duisburg, nothing out of the ordinary. The rain had started in the afternoon and hadn't stopped since. The rhythm of the wipers and the monotonous hum of the engine were the only sounds accompanying me as I left the kilometers behind on the lonely Autobahn. It was just after 10 p.m., and the darkness was almost impenetrable. Only occasionally did the wet road markings reflect the light of my headlights. Everything seemed normal until I noticed a car driving behind me. It was a dark station wagon, maybe a BMW, and it kept a constant distance. Nothing unusual, I thought, perhaps another driver who appreciated the Autobahn as much as I did. But after a few kilometers, the station wagon turned off at an exit. I didn't think any more about it until a few minutes later, another car, a silver Audi, appeared in my rearview mirror. It drove just like the station wagon before, stayed behind me, kept its distance, and then it too disappeared at an exit. An uneasy feeling crept up on me. When I looked in the rearview mirror again, I saw a third car, this time a dark van. The rain made it difficult to make out details, but the van's headlights seemed to follow me almost like eyes. The thought was absurd, but it wouldn't leave me alone. After about 30 km, I decided to take a break. There was a rest stop near Dorsten that I often used. It was small and not very busy, perfect for a quick stop. I signaled and drove into the parking lot where I parked my truck next to two other parked vehicles. The van drove past without stopping. A breath of relief swept through me. The rest stop was almost empty. Inside, only an elderly man was eating a plate of bratwurst and potato salad, and the cashier was boredly staring at her phone. I ordered a coffee and sat down at a table overlooking my truck. The rain lashed against the large windows, and the scene outside seemed almost unreal. The darkness of the night swallowed the surroundings. As I drank my coffee, I noticed something that made me shiver. The van was back. It was parked at the edge of the parking lot, its lights off, but I could clearly make out its silhouette. The old man had left, and I was now alone in the room with the cashier. Still staring at her phone, I paid and left the rest stop. The rain had subsided, but the air was cold and damp. As I walked to my truck, I felt watched. My heart beat faster, and I paused, turned around, but except for the van and the other vehicles, there was nothing to be seen. The cashier had turned off the light in the rest stop, and I was now alone. As I got into the cab, I noticed a detail that hadn't been there before, a small note tucked under my windshield wiper. With trembling hands, I got out again and took it. The writing on it was hasty, almost illegible, but the message was clear. "You're next." My breath caught and a cold shiver ran down my spine. In the distance, I saw the van's headlights light up. It slowly started to roll towards me. Without thinking, I jumped into the truck, started the engine, and stepped on the gas pedal. The tires screeched on the wet asphalt, and I sped back onto the Autobahn. In the rearview mirror, I saw the van following me. My head was a chaos of questions. Who were these people? Why were they following me? And what did they want to do with me? The van's lights loomed menacingly in my rearview mirror. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I accelerated the truck as fast as possible. The engine roared, and I felt the adrenaline surge through my body. The rain had started again, lashing loudly against the windshield and blurring my vision. Still, I could clearly see the van's headlights. They were still closed behind me. The Autobahn was as empty as before, no other vehicles, no way to call for help. My phone lay on the passenger seat, but when I picked it up, it still showed no network. Of course, I was on my own. After about 5 kilometers, a sign appeared. "Exit in 3 km. My mind raced. Should I leave the Autobahn and try to shake them off? Or was that exactly what they wanted, to lure me into a trap? The van showed no signs of overtaking me or keeping its distance. It simply followed stubbornly and relentlessly. I decided to keep going. The road remained straight, endless, and monotonous, but I knew I needed a plan. Then I noticed something new. 2 more vehicles appeared in the distance, both driving towards me. They stopped in the oncoming lane and turned off their headlights. My throat went dry, and I realized I was in serious trouble. The headlights of the van behind me flashed twice, a signal that the other vehicles seemed to understand. Suddenly they turned around and positioned themselves in my lane, one on the right, the other on the left. They forced me to slow down, enclosing me like predators surrounding their prey. I was trapped. My heart raced as I searched for a way out. The road ahead was blocked, and behind me the van was pressing ever closer. I slammed on the brakes, and the truck came to a sharp, screeching halt. The 3 vehicles slowly encircled me, their engines purring menacingly. I turned off my headlights and left the engine running, ready to seize any opportunity to escape. One of the men got out of the van. He wore a black rain jacket, its hood concealing his face. In his hand he held something that looked like a crowbar. He knocked twice on my door. "Come out," he said, his voice calm but icy. "We want to talk." I didn't answer. Instead, I grabbed my phone and held it to my ear as if I were calling someone. Maybe I could scare them off, but he just laughed, a deep, cold laugh that sent chills down my spine. "There's no signal here," he said, and took a step back. "So stop playing games." The other men got out of their vehicles. There were now 4 of them in total. They didn't have weapons in their hands, but their body language revealed that they weren't afraid of violence. I had to act fast. I turned on my truck's headlights and stomped on the gas. The engine roared and the massive tires dug into the wet asphalt. One of the men jumped aside, but the man in the rain jacket was caught by the bumper bar and thrown to the ground. The vehicles in front of me still blocked the road, but I had no choice. I steered the truck to the right and rammed one of the cars. The impact made the truck shudder, and I heard the screech of metal on metal. The way was clear. I sped on at full throttle. In the rearview mirror, I saw the men hastily jumping back into their vehicles. The van and another car gave chase. The 3rd car was too badly damaged to continue. The Autobahn seemed endless, and I knew my diesel supply was limited. In the distance, a tunnel appeared, a narrow, dark passage that seemed to swallow me. The van and the car were still behind me, and I knew they would use their next chance in the tunnel to stop me. As I entered the tunnel, the engine noise became deafening, the walls echoed the roar, and the space seemed to close in. The van's headlights cast an eerie light into the tunnel. I knew they wouldn't let me escape easily. In the middle of the tunnel, an idea came to me. I turned off the headlights and suddenly slammed on the brakes. The truck came to a noisy halt, and the van behind me couldn't react in time. It crashed into the back of the truck, a deafening bang, followed by sparks illuminating the darkness of the tunnel. The impact gave me enough time. I jumped out of the driver's cab and ran, my legs burning with exertion. The men from the van were stunned, but they wouldn't take long to follow me. At the end of the tunnel, I saw a light, the exit. It was my only hope. I reached the end of the tunnel and found myself on a small country road lined with dense trees. In the distance, I saw the lights of an inn. With my last ounce of strength, I stumbled towards the road. A truck came down the road, and I stood in the middle of the road to force it to stop. The driver braked sharply and got out, an older man with a cap. He saw my condition and immediately understood that something was wrong. "Help me, please," I gasped. "They're after me." He helped me into the driver's cab and took me to the nearest police station. There, I told the officers everything that had happened. They promised to look for the men, but I knew they had long since disappeared. The police found my truck and the men's damaged vehicles, but there was no trace of them. The officers explained to me that the A31 had long been a target for organized crime, but their investigations remained inconclusive. I survived, but the memories of that night haunted me for a long time. Every time I drive along the ghost Autobahn, I feel a cold shiver run down my spine. Some say it's only spooky because of its traffic volume, but I know that the real ghosts are the people who use it. I had decided to drive the route from Berlin to Munich alone instead of taking the train. It was a spontaneous decision that promised freedom and time for reflection. My small VW Polo, light blue and a bit old, was packed with my belongings, including an old backpack, a thermos of coffee, and a few sandwiches. The Autobahn was quiet that day, and the sun shone deceptively peacefully on the landscape. It was just after 4 p.m. when I decided to take a break. A rest stop near Leipzig seemed ideal. I parked the car, stretched, and entered the small building, which, like many rest stops, seemed a bit run down, with the scent of frying oil and coffee in the air. Inside, it was quiet. Only an older couple eating cake and a truck driver fiddling with his phone were there. I bought a coffee and went back to my car. Next to my car now stood a black Audi, its windows heavily tinted. I noticed a woman quickly getting out and taking something from the trunk. She was elegantly dressed, wore sunglasses even though it was cloudy, and seemed to be in a hurry. She left a briefcase on the bench next to my car. I thought she would come back, but she disappeared into the building. After a few minutes, I wanted to drive on. As I took my thermos from the roof of my car, my gaze fell on the briefcase. I was sure she had forgotten it. I hesitated. Perhaps it would be smarter to just leave it, but something in me wanted to help. I took the briefcase and put it in my car. I thought I could drop it off at the next police station. Back on the Autobahn, I started to feel uncomfortable. The briefcase seemed heavier than it looked. My thoughts raced. What if there was something valuable or forbidden in it? But before I could get carried away, I noticed something in the rearview mirror. A black SUV was driving close behind me. Much too close. At first I thought it was an impatient driver, but it stayed behind me kilometer after kilometer. My hands gripped the steering wheel. Then another car, a dark BMW, joined behind the SUV. Suddenly, the Autobahn no longer felt so empty. After about 20 minutes of the cars following me, I decided to take the next exit. Maybe I wanted to test them. Maybe I was just looking for a place where I could feel safe. But when I turned off, they followed me. The exit led to a small country road lined with dense forests. My heart beat faster as I ignored the navigation system and took random turns. The cars stayed with me, their headlights like predatory eyes in the twilight. Then they suddenly flashed their lights. I stopped on a dirt road, my hands trembling. Before I could get out, I instinctively stomped on the briefcase to open it. The lock sprang open surprisingly easily. Inside was something that took my breath away: several thick files, handwritten notes, and a USB stick. The notes were in German, but some names in them sounded Eastern European. A map showed a connecting line between several cities, including Berlin, Leipzig, and Munich. Even before I could grasp the meaning of what I was seeing, I heard the tires of the cars behind me crunching on the gravel. I looked up. They had caught up with me. One of the men got out of the SUV. He was tall, wore a leather jacket, and had a weapon in his hand. He came towards my car slowly, like a hunter confident of his prey. "Get out, slowly," he said. My heart pounded like a hammer. I knew it was too late to just drive away, but I had no idea how I was going to get out of here alive. The man's words echoed in my head, "Get out, slowly." My hands clutched the steering wheel, my body trembled, but my mind raced. I knew I had no chance if I obeyed. My gaze wandered back to the open briefcase. The papers and the USB stick obviously meant something they were willing to do anything for. I quickly closed the briefcase and placed it on the passenger seat. Then I heard the man coming closer, his steps steady and heavy. My thoughts raced. Escape was my only option. With a jolt, I floored the gas pedal. My car's tires screeched on the gravel and the car shot forward. The man jumped back, but his figure did not disappear from my rearview mirror. Instead, I heard a loud bang, a shot. The rear left window shattered into pieces, and I instinctively ducked. The country road ahead was dark and narrow, lined with tall trees that bent over the roadway like menacing shadows. The SUV and the BMW immediately gave chase, their headlights blinding me in the rearview mirror, and I felt panic spread through my chest. The rain had started again. And the road became slippery. After a few kilometers, a crossroads appeared. I turned sharply right, almost skidding off the road. The pursuers followed me without hesitation. Their goal was clear. They wanted to stop me, no matter the cost. The road led deeper into the forest. My small car groaned under the strain of taking the curves at high speed. Then a sign appeared in front of me, "Road closed." My heart sank. A makeshift barrier of concrete blocks and signs blocked the way. There was no time to brake. I wrenched the steering wheel around and steered the car onto a narrow, unpaved path that branched off to the side. The tires slid in the mud, and the branches of the trees loudly struck the car body. The path was barely passable, but the headlights behind me showed that they wouldn't give up. I could hear their shouts, a clear sign that they were angry. Then I saw it. An old barn appeared in the darkness, its outline like that of a dead animal, decayed and abandoned. I knew I couldn't drive the car any further. I slammed on the brakes, grabbed the briefcase, and jumped out of the car. The rain lashed down on me as I ran to the barn. Inside, it was pitch black. The smell of damp straw and rotting wood hung in the air, and every step I took made the floor creak. I hastily searched for a hiding place. In a corner, I found an old stack of hay, and I crawled under it, clutching the briefcase tightly. The pursuers reached the barn only seconds later. I heard the doors being ripped open and their voices tearing through the silence. "She's in here, find her." Their footsteps echoed through the room. The crunch of wood under their boots was so loud that I felt it would betray me. I held my breath as a flashlight beam swept through the darkness, gliding over the walls and beams. The light beam came dangerously close to my hiding place. I knew I couldn't stay long. Slowly, I pulled the USB stick out of the briefcase and put it in my jacket pocket. If I survived, I had to make sure this evidence reached the right people. Suddenly, one of the men let out a loud curse. "She must be in here somewhere." The footsteps quickened, and I heard them systematically searching the barn. My heart pounded so loudly that I feared they could hear it. Then it happened. One of the men stepped directly onto the hay under which I was hiding. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tensed. He stopped as if he had heard something. His breath was heavy, and I could smell the faint odor of cigarette smoke. But before he could investigate further, one of the other men outside called out, "I heard something." The man above me hurried out, and I used the moment. I crawled as quietly as possible out of my hiding place and crept to the back of the barn, where a small, broken window offered an escape route. I climbed out and landed roughly on the muddy ground. The rain was heavy now, and the darkness of the forest seemed impenetrable, but I knew I couldn't stop. With the briefcase in my hand, I ran on, while the men's voices behind me grew fainter. After half an hour, I stumbled onto a small road through the forest. My clothes were soaked, my legs ached, and the cold crept through my skin. But then in the distance, I saw lights. It was a small village. I dragged myself there and finally reached an inn. The innkeeper, an older man with a worried look, let me in immediately. When I told him my story, he called the police. The investigations that followed were extensive. The evidence in the briefcase led to a revelation that made headlines: a widespread organization that smuggled and exploited people from Eastern Europe into Germany. But the men who had pursued me remained untraceable. I survived, but I knew I would forever be looking over my shoulder. Every shadow on the road, every unknown car, my nerves frayed. The Autobahn was no longer my friend. It had become a place where I had learned how far people would go to protect their secrets. I was driving on a remote country road leading through the hilly landscape of North Rhine-Westphalia. It was late afternoon, and the sun was slowly setting over the fields and forests that stretched on both sides of the road. My destination was Cologne, where I was supposed to attend a business dinner. My navigation system had led me off the Autobahn supposedly to save time, but the route led me onto increasingly narrower roads, and with every kilometer I felt more uneasy. My old Mercedes hummed steadily, and I was thinking about the presentation I had to give the next day. But my thoughts were interrupted when I saw a car stopped on the roadside in the distance. Its hazard lights were flashing frantically, and a woman stood beside it, her figure small and lost on the deserted road. I hesitated. My first reaction was to drive past. It wasn't uncommon to hear stories of such situations being used as traps, but the woman looked desperate. She wore a thin jacket that barely protected her from the cool evening air and held a phone in her hand, which she kept pointing at the car. I thought of my sister, who often traveled alone. What if it really was an emergency? I stopped about 20 meters behind her car and rolled down the window a bit. "Do you need help?" I asked, my voice cautious but friendly. "Yes, my car won't start," she called back, her voice sounding rushed. "I haven't been able to reach anyone." I nodded and got out, the keys clutched tightly in my hand. Her car was a small Opel, old and covered in rust spots. I walked slowly towards her and watched as she took a step back, as if unsure whether she could trust me. But something about her posture didn't seem right. It wasn't the uncertainty of someone in distress, but something else, something calculated. As I got closer, I saw it, a rope dangling from under the car. It wasn't attached, it had been deliberately wrapped around the axle, as if someone had sabotaged the car. My heart skipped a beat. I looked up at her, and her expression had changed. The desperate look was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating calm. "This doesn't look good," I said, my voice as calm as possible as I slowly backed away. But before I could fully turn around, I heard it, footsteps behind me, several of them. I turned around just in time to see a man emerging from the bushes with a heavy metal pipe in his hand. A second man followed him, broad-shouldered and with a grim look. The woman was grinning now, her facade completely dropped. "Get in," the first man said, his voice deep and commanding. "We don't want any trouble." "What do you want?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Your car, your money, and maybe more," the woman said. "It would be wise to cooperate now." My instinct screamed at me to act. I was unarmed, and against 3 people I had no chance, but my car was still open and the key was in the ignition. Without thinking twice, I turned and ran back to my car, my legs heavy with adrenaline. "Stop him!" one of the men shouted, and I heard footsteps pursuing me. The gravel under my shoes crunched loudly, and I threw myself into the driver's cab. I slammed the door shut and turned the key. The engine started. But before I could drive off, I felt something heavy hit the window. The metal pipe. Cracks spread across the glass like spider webs. I pressed the gas pedal. The car shot forward, and I heard the shouts of the pursuers behind me. In the rearview mirror, I saw the woman and the men getting into an old SUV that had been hidden behind a tree. They wouldn't give up. The road ahead was narrow and winding, the forest dense on both sides. The SUV was faster than my old Mercedes, and its headlights illuminated the night with a menacing glow. My breath was shallow and my thoughts raced. I knew I couldn't shake them off. The road was too lonely and my chances of finding help were slim. After about 5 kilometers, a turnoff appeared, leading to a forest path. It was my only option. I turned abruptly, my car's tires skidding on the wet ground, and the car swerved. The SUV followed me without hesitation. Its heavy tires had no problem with the unpaved path. I knew I couldn't escape if I stayed on the road. The only way was to hide. Further ahead, I spotted an old woodpile at the side of the path. I slammed on the brakes, jumped out of the car, and ran into the forest. The darkness swallowed me, and the rain began again, softly but steadily. I heard the SUV stop behind my car, doors slamming shut, and voices breaking the silence. "He's in here somewhere," one of the men said, and I heard the click of metal weapons. My feet crunched on the damp leaves as I ventured deeper into the forest. My heart pounded like a hammer, and I knew I needed every second to gain a lead. But then in the distance, I saw a light, a faint, pulsating light flickering through the trees. It wasn't my pursuer's flashlight, it was something else, hope or danger, I didn't know. But I had no choice but to run towards it. The light flickered faintly through the dense trees, and I stumbled towards it, my legs heavy with exertion and fear. Behind me I heard the voices of the pursuers moving through the forest. The cracking of branches and the dull rustling of leaves echoed in the damp, dark night. They were getting closer. When I reached the light, I recognized what it was, a small construction lamp hanging over a generator. Next to it stood an abandoned forestry container, surrounded by old tools and stacked logs. The place looked deserted, but the light betrayed that someone had been here recently. I ducked behind the container and tried to control my breathing. My heart was pounding so loudly that it seemed as if it could lead my pursuers directly to me. I heard them clearly, their voices seemed angry and frustrated. "He can't be far, the forest ends soon, and we've blocked the road." I closed my eyes and tried to devise a plan. My chances of surviving against 3 armed individuals were slim. The forest was my only ally, but even here I was trapped. Then my gaze fell on the tools next to the container, a rusty axe, an iron bar, and a rope. They were old and heavy, but they could help me. I grabbed the iron bar, its cold metal digging mercilessly into my trembling hands. The footsteps came closer, and the men's flashlights cut through the darkness like blades. I heard one of them walking directly towards the container. I knew I had only one shot. I retreated to the back of the container and waited until the footsteps were directly in front of me. Then I stepped out, swung the iron bar with all my might, and hit one of the men on the shoulder. He screamed, the sound echoing through the forest, and he fell to the ground. But before I could react, I heard the shot. The second man had drawn a pistol and fired blindly into the darkness. The bullet struck the container only a few centimeters from me. I dropped the iron bar and ran again deeper into the forest. My breath came in gasps, and panic threatened to overwhelm me. I heard the men behind me cursing and shouting instructions to each other. The darkness was almost impenetrable now. The rain had started again, and the ground under my feet turned into a slippery, treacherous mud. I stumbled several times, fell, and scraped my hands, but I forced myself to keep running. The forest seemed endless, the trees grew denser, and I could barely see my hand in front of my eyes. Then I saw it. An old hunting lodge appeared before me, a crooked, dilapidated cabin overgrown with moss and vines. It was small, and its roof seemed half collapsed, but it was my only hope. I crept inside, the door creaking softly, and the smell of damp wood and mold wafted towards me. Inside it was dark, only the faint light of their flashlights penetrated through the cracks. I frantically searched for a hiding place. In a corner of the cabin I found an old trunk, large enough to squeeze into. I opened the heavy lid and climbed inside, carefully pulling the lid over me and holding my breath. The men reached the cabin minutes later. Their voices were louder, and I heard one of them kicking something. It was the man I had hit with the iron bar. He was cursing and speaking angrily while the others searched the cabin. "Where is he? He must be here. He can't be far." The flashlights shone over the walls and the floor. The light penetrated through the cracks of the trunk. One of the men came so close that I could see his heavy boots directly in front of the trunk. He bent down, and I could barely prevent my body from trembling with fear. But then the third man called from outside. "There's something," footprints in the mud. The boots moved, and the men left the cabin. I waited until I was sure they were gone before I quietly opened the trunk and climbed out. My body screamed with pain, my muscles burned, but I knew I couldn't waste time. Outside it was silent, the rain had stopped, and the forest was frozen. I followed a small path leading away from the cabin, hoping it would lead me to a road or a village. After about 20 minutes, I saw lights in the distance. It was a country road. With my last ounce of strength, I stumbled onto the road. A truck came down the road, and I stood in the middle of the road to force it to stop. The driver braked sharply and got out, an older man with a cap. He saw my condition and immediately understood that something was wrong. "Help me, please," I gasped. "They're after me." He helped me into the driver's cab and took me to the nearest police station. There, I told the officers everything that had happened. They promised to look for the men, but I knew they had long since disappeared. The experience changed me. Every time I drive on a remote road, I feel the weight of that night. I've become more cautious. I don't trust strangers as easily anymore, but the memories of the forest, the cabin, and the men's shouts still haunt me. Some wounds never heal.